you're always going to have the fear. Because if you're not afraid of what you're doing, then you're not pushing yourself enough. This is my philosophy on pricing.
Yeah.
Whenever I start a new client, we have to have a conversation, right? Because if they say, hey, I want you to make me this video, like I can make a 2-minute video and a 20-minute video and they can be the same price. Or I can make a 20-second video and it's the same price as a 20-minute video, because it depends on how much work you're going to put into it and how how complex the shot is. And so you have to have a conversation with the client and say, okay, here's what's your goal? How do you want me to solve this for you? And they'll say, this is what our expectations are. And then from that, you say, okay, well, you don't know what I can do. If I tell you this is going to take me 20, if I say I'm going to charge you hourly and say it's going to be $100 an hour. If I say it's going to be $100 an hour, you don't know what I can do in an hour.
Yeah.
If I say it's going to be $1,000 a day, you don't know what I can do in a day.
Right.
And so it's very difficult to lay that all out. So you have to kind of start with some samples and say, well, do you like this? This project this is about a $10,000 project. This is a $5,000 project. This is a $20,000 project. Which one of these do you think you are looking for?
Yep.
And so whenever possible, and I oftentimes, this is the line I use on clients a lot, say, I don't really care what the budget is. Because to me, because it's going to be based on my time, I'm going to value it based on my time. So if it's a big thing, I'm going to spend a lot of time doing it, and if it's a smaller budget, I'm going to spend less time on it. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter to me. So if you want to give me $2,000 or $20,000, I'm still going to be your best friend.
Right.
And so that takes the pressure off, because some people think, oh, if I'm not going to pay this guy at least this much money, he won't really value me. I'm going to say, no, I'm going to value you. I'm just going to work less hours for you.
Right.
It's real simple. And so
I'll paint the Mona Lisa in oil, or I'll use crayon.
Yeah. And so
it's up to you.
It's up to you. Yeah. And so having that conversation and just because that takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
But have that conversation sooner than later. And then
totally.
And do you know the pyramid? So this is like whenever
good, fast, and cheap.
No.
Okay. Is that
it's like the triangle for project management.
Okay.
So you have your
There's a lot of triangles going on here. Okay.
So the scope of everything, how big is it going to be?
Yep.
Your schedule and resources. So scope, schedule, resources. So once you establish that, that's your original budget. That's the initial email. They'll say, hey, can you do a project for us? Well, what are you looking for? Well, this is what we want. Okay, well, I can do this in this amount of time for this amount of money. Mm-hmm. And then if they agree to that, once you lock those 3 things in, if any one of those change, it's going to affect the other 2. So if they come back and they say, hey, actually, they cut the budget, then all of a sudden, okay, well, we can now reduce the scope and make this a much smaller thing, or we can adjust the schedule and we can put this in in a few months when we don't have any other work coming in.
Yep.
And so, or if they come back and say, hey, we need this a lot sooner. We'll say, well, then your options are we can either reduce the scope so we can have more time, or we can increase the scope, the budget.
Yep.
Which do you want to do? And so having that basic triangle is a real quick way to, as soon as someone says, hey, I need to change this, and say, well, here's your options, and you give it right back to them and let them solve that problem.
Yep.
So we were doing a pitch for a different organization. Mm-hmm. And they said, hey, we're doing this 10-minute in this big conference. We're gonna have like a bunch of people there. We got this 10-minute stretch, and we want to play some games in there. And so we were working with the producer, and we said, well, hey, here's 2 games we think could play that. We can work with your host. We can work with your AV guys. We can make this a really amazing 10 minutes. And we said, what's your budget on this? And this is one of the best lines. The producer is this lady from Nashville or New York. She said they're expecting a $10,000 solution. I thought that's really interesting, because we could have sold it to them for $1,000. Brian and I, we were ready. Like, we wanted to do this event because we were trying to get our foot in the door with this client. And so we had talked about it. The games are already made. It's just our time. Right. So we're willing to sacrifice. So we're thinking, well, we could just for $1,000. But she came back and she said, no. They want a $10,000 solution. If you sell them something for $1,000, they've only got a $1,000 product. They're trying to build this big experience.
Perception.
The expectation was we need a $10,000 experience. So our workload didn't change very much at all. But our value changed greatly.
Right.
Now, granted, when we got there, we were a little bit more attentive to them, to their needs. If they needed anything, well, yes, ma'am.
Dress a little nicer than those crew members.
We were a little bit. But just knowing the expectation of how you value yourself. If people see you as the $500 solution, they'll see as that. But when they see you as the $5,000 solution or the $10,000 solution, then they're like, there's a perceived value there that's really, really important, and they want that. Yep. And so if they want it, you might as well offer it to them, because you can literally underprice yourself and lose the bigger clients.
Yeah.
And so if you're wondering how do you got to work yourself up the food chain. When you do something, like honestly, like the difference between a Hollywood film and a YouTube video, you can tell the difference, right? Like if someone shot something on YouTube, like a fan film or something,
sure,
and you see Hollywood, it's like perfect.
There are some credible fan films.
There are some very good ones.
Yeah.
But if you when you watch the credits, the credits roll at the end of a Hollywood film, the credits go on for 15 minutes. I mean, it's like there's so many people involved in that because one person will take one very specific job and they will spend weeks and months on one small thing. And so what happens is if I'm working on the lower end food chain, you've got one person who's going to do 12 jobs and he's going to do them as quick as he can and move on to the next one. And so what happens is you go up the food chain, you're spending more time focused on fewer things. And so whenever you're going to go up the food chain, you have to kind of specialize, or you have to kind of get focused and go, I'm really good at pulling keys, or I'm really good at sound design, or I'm really good at one thing. Now, granted, I can do all these other things, but you need that one thing and kind of get you there. And then once you're there, you need to spend some more time, and the expectations are higher. And that's one of the things that makes you better is being around places where the expectations are higher. If you're doing wedding videos and they're just the expectation's not there, they just want to see themselves on a video, then that's the expectation. That's what you're going to do. If you're doing a commercial for the local syndicated television, the expectation is I just want to see myself there. If you're doing a national spot, the thing is it has to be perfect. The time, it has to be this exact time, this exact format. Everything has to be. And the expectation is more, and so you perform better. So it's almost like you just raise your expectations. So if you can put yourself in situations that have high expectations, the stress level is going to be high.
Right.
But it's going to force you to do better, or you'll fail. And it's like, and that's what most people who are doing good, it's the Peterson principle. You will accelerate to the point of your incompetence. And so the trick is just to be as competent as possible.
So is that the Sitton principle? The Peter Sitton principle?
But I think that's just the whole thing. It's like you need to raise your competency to a point where people can take you up. And so if you're not there yet, go learn something new or really polish what you already know.
Yeah. There's so many things we can keep talking about, but I got to ask just foundationally, there's always that question of like, what do you know today that you wish you'd known in the beginning? Whatever you want to speak to regarding what you know today. I know you've got all this experience. What kind of comes to the surface for you?
The first thing I think is most people, when they're first starting off, there's a lot of fear. And there's the fear of, am I good enough? And so essentially when you're first starting off, you usually have a good eye and you can see what's good and you can critique it and say, okay, that's not good. And then when you start building stuff, you go, well, I know my stuff. I've got a good eye and I know that my stuff's not good. And so they'll give up. And so you have to keep progressing. You got to keep getting better and keep getting better and keep getting better. And so then when you get to the point where your stuff is as good as the stuff that you like, then there's the tendency to, okay, I've arrived, I'm done. And I think there's two things. You're always going to have the fear, because if you're not afraid of what you're doing, then you're not pushing yourself enough. So there should always be this fear of, am I pushing too far? Is that client too big? Is this too bold of a move? You should always be pushing that. There should always be a sense of fear. And the way you overcome fear is through curiosity. And you have to be so curious about what would happen if. What if I did do this? What if we did step out there? That's what I need to do. And so you be super curious about that, and you mix that super curious with that progression, and you keep pushing yourself into trying new things. Learn a new app, learn a new technique, figure out a new way to solve a problem. And it's that combination, it's that kind of two approach of, I totally want to progress. I totally want to keep on growing this, and just keep pushing yourself. And I think so when you're first starting off, there's the fear of, well, why do I have a voice? Why do I even matter? Or there's also the people who are overly confident, but just have the concept of just continually trying to push yourself into new things. And so,
it is funny too, because I know there's such a thing as imposter syndrome, where you're an expert at what you do.
For sure.
But then it comes time to do it, and you're like, I'm not the guy. I don't know enough. I got somebody else is better. There's always someone else better. There's always someone else worse. You are, the right person. Yeah. And it's good. It's interesting you say that. It's good to mention, because I was watching a documentary on HBO put out a year or two ago about Steven Spielberg. And he talks in there about how every single time he comes to set, he's afraid, like he's like, he feels inept or he feels inadequate or he's like, what am I doing? And I'm like, what? You're like, you're Steven Spielberg. What are you talking about, right? And
Lucas had a very similar. There's it's called there's a documentary, Empire of Dreams. And it's about the making of the first Star Wars, and it was a train wreck. I mean, it was just a complete. No one thought it was going to work. The actors didn't know what was going on. The people they were making incredible stuff. The story was a mess, and literally it got saved in the edit. Like the only reason, there's two things that made it work. It got saved in the edit, and they re-edited, cut, and dropped a whole bunch of stuff.
That's why it's called A New Hope, because the editor, the editor, and then there was no hope for it.
Seriously, it was so bad. People were like, "This is it."
Yeah.
Then they go in over literally over a few days, redo the edit, hand it off, and it gets the best score of all times.
Oh yeah,
and so John Williams and the editor literally turned that into one of the best movies I've ever made, which is crazy to think about. But what's great about that, whenever I'm feeling like I'm in over my head or I've lost, I just think to myself, I just have to save it in the edit. And so then we always have that chance. No matter what the project is, just edit it. Just chop off something. What can I cut out of this? What can I just keep cutting stuff until you have the good stuff, and then build off that a little bit.